The town is talking. Your daughter is the reason why everyone is laughing it. My beloved child, pause here for just a moment, because what you are about to hear is not arriving by accident. Out of all the voices surrounding you today, this one has quietly found its way to your heart for a reason. Don't skip. Not because you are being asked to, but because something important is waiting for you in the next few moments, and if you rush ahead, you may miss the gentle truth that has already begun unfolding around your life. There has been a conversation growing in silence, carried from one smile to another, from one doorstep to the next, and while you may not have noticed it yet, the town has noticed something that you have been too humble to see. They are talking. They are smiling. They are wondering. Yet the reason behind their laughter is nothing like the story you have imagined in your quiet moments. You have asked yourself more than once whether the sacrifices you made were ever seen, whether the countless evenings spent encouraging, comforting, guiding, and believing in your daughter would ever become visible beyond the walls of your own home. Today, I want you to release that question, because the answer has already begun walking through the streets before you could even recognize its footsteps. There is something remarkable about the way genuine kindness travels. It never announces itself loudly. It never demands attention. Instead, it moves quietly from one heart to another until suddenly an entire community begins speaking about the same beautiful thing without realizing how the story first began. That is exactly what has happened here. Your daughter has been carrying pieces of your character into places you have never visited. She has spoken with gentleness because she learned it from watching you. She has shown patience because she first experienced it in your presence. She has offered encouragement to someone who almost gave up, not because anyone instructed her to do so that morning, but because those seeds were planted long ago through moments you probably believed had been forgotten. Stay till the end, because the deeper reason behind this unexpected attention has not yet been revealed. Imagine someone asking your daughter a simple question. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing dramatic. Just an ordinary conversation that slowly became unforgettable. Instead of speaking only about herself, she began sharing small stories. Stories about home. Stories about lessons that shaped her. Stories about quiet evenings filled with hope instead of noise. She never realized that each sentence painted a picture so vivid that people listening began smiling without even noticing it. One person repeated the story to another. Another shared it with a friend. Before long, laughter filled the conversations. Not laughter meant to wound, but the warm laughter that appears when people hear something unexpectedly wholesome in a world that often expects the opposite. They laughed because they were surprised that such goodness could still exist in ordinary places. They laughed because your daughter's gratitude felt refreshing. They laughed because every story she told carried a gentle light that reminded others of what truly matters. Yet there is another layer beneath what everyone can see. Very few understand why her words carry such quiet confidence. They assume it appeared naturally. They think it is simply part of her personality. But you know better, even if you have forgotten. Confidence built on kindness does not appear overnight. It grows through thousands of unseen moments. Every encouraging sentence you spoke when she doubted herself. Every calm response during difficult days. Every example of choosing compassion instead of pride. Those moments became invisible treasures stored inside her heart. Now those treasures are revealing themselves in ways that even surprise her. She walks into conversations without realizing that people leave feeling lighter after speaking with her. She smiles naturally, and somehow others find themselves smiling too. She never planned for this. She simply became the reflection of love consistently lived before her eyes. Perhaps you have wondered whether your efforts mattered. Perhaps there were nights when exhaustion whispered that no one noticed. Perhaps there were mornings when you questioned whether your words were making any difference at all. Listen carefully now. The answers to those silent questions are no longer hidden inside your own home. They have begun appearing in places where your voice has never been heard directly. That is why the town is talking. Not because perfection has arrived, but because authenticity has quietly revealed itself through someone who carries your influence with remarkable grace. Something even more meaningful is beginning to unfold, though almost nobody has connected the pieces together yet. Each conversation surrounding your daughter is slowly uncovering another story, one that reaches far beyond admiration or pleasant surprises. There is someone listening more carefully than everyone else. Someone whose perspective is changing with every new story they hear. They have not spoken openly yet. They have simply remained observant, collecting small details that others dismiss as ordinary. While laughter fills the air around these conversations, this person hears something entirely different. They hear purpose. They hear character. They hear the quiet echoes of a family built upon values that cannot be purchased or imitated. And before long, that realization will begin opening a door that no one expected to appear. So remain here a little longer. Let today's story settle gently within your heart. What seems like harmless conversation today is quietly becoming the beginning of something far greater than anyone in that town can currently imagine. And what happens next will reveal why these unexpected smiles were only the first sign that an extraordinary chapter has already begun. Not every story becomes deeper by becoming louder. Some stories become unforgettable because they continue unfolding in complete silence until one small moment changes how everything before it is understood. This is one of those moments. Stay till the end, because the laughter that seemed so simple is about to reveal a meaning that very few people have noticed. Something important is waiting for you, and it has been growing quietly while everyone believed they already understood the whole picture. There came a morning when the familiar conversations around town began to change. The smiles were still there, but now they carried curiosity instead of surprise. People were no longer asking, "Did you hear what your daughter said?" They were asking, "Who taught her to become this kind of person?" That single question traveled farther than anyone expected. It moved through ordinary conversations, across front porches, through small gatherings, and into hearts that had almost forgotten how much influence one person's character could have on another. Your daughter never tried to become the center of attention. In fact, she often stepped back so someone else could be seen. Yet somehow, that quiet habit became one of the reasons people remembered her. She listened before she spoke. She encouraged before she judged. She celebrated other people's victories without needing recognition for herself. In a world where many searched for applause, she quietly searched for ways to lift someone else's spirit. People noticed. Not immediately, but steadily. And when enough hearts notice the same beautiful quality, conversations begin to spread naturally. What many could not understand was where this steady kindness came from. They searched for complicated explanations, but the truth remained beautifully simple. It came from the ordinary days no one else witnessed. It came from the conversations at home that never reached social media. It came from moments when love looked completely ordinary, sharing encouragement during disappointment, choosing patience during frustration, and reminding one another that kindness is never wasted, even when it seems unnoticed. As those memories quietly shaped her, she carried them into places you never expected. One afternoon she comforted someone who believed they had failed. Another day she celebrated someone who thought nobody cared. On another occasion she gently reminded a discouraged friend that difficult seasons never define an entire future. None of these moments seemed extraordinary to her. She simply spoke the way she had learned to speak. Yet each small act became another reason people continued talking. Don't skip, because another piece of this story has remained hidden until now. Among those listening was someone who had never spoken with your daughter for very long. They observed from a distance. They paid attention to how people responded after spending time with her. Again and again they noticed the same pattern. Conversations ended with lighter hearts. Smiles appeared where worry had been. Hope quietly returned where disappointment had settled. It was impossible to ignore. They began asking themselves a question that no one else dared to ask aloud. What kind of family creates someone like this? That question stayed with them longer than they expected. It echoed through quiet evenings. It returned during ordinary routines. It challenged assumptions they had carried for years. They realized that true character cannot be borrowed for a single day. It grows patiently over time, watered by consistent love, thoughtful guidance, and gentle example. They were no longer impressed only by your daughter. They had become deeply curious about the foundation beneath her life. At the same time, your daughter remained completely unaware of what was happening around her. She continued living with the same humility she always had. She smiled without expecting praise. She encouraged without expecting thanks. She served without expecting attention. Ironically, that very humility became the reason admiration continued growing. The less she tried to impress people, the more unforgettable she became. Perhaps you have experienced moments when you wondered if goodness still mattered in today's world. Perhaps you questioned whether quiet faithfulness could ever be noticed among louder voices. Let this be your reminder that genuine character carries a quiet strength that eventually reaches farther than anyone expects. It does not race. It does not compete. It simply remains consistent until people cannot ignore its presence any longer. Now the conversations throughout the town are becoming different once again. They are no longer centered only on your daughter's words or actions. They are beginning to uncover something even more meaningful, something connected to a decision that is slowly taking shape behind the scenes. A few people have already sensed it, though they cannot yet explain why. They only know that every story they hear seems to point toward the same unexpected conclusion. And when that conclusion finally steps into the light, many will look back at these cheerful conversations and realize they were witnessing the beginning of something remarkable all along. Without knowing it, there are moments when an ordinary afternoon quietly becomes the turning point of an entire story, and almost no one realizes it until much later. This was one of those afternoons. The conversations that had once been filled with cheerful laughter slowly began carrying a different feeling. A quiet respect. Don't skip, because the reason behind that change is only now beginning to reveal itself, and something important is waiting for you before this chapter reaches its end. Your daughter continued walking through her days exactly as she always had. She greeted familiar faces with the same gentle smile. She offered encouragement without rehearsing the words. She listened when others needed someone to understand them, even when no one else noticed. To her, these were simply ordinary choices. She never imagined they would become the stories other people carried home. One evening, a small gathering formed as neighbors shared moments from their week. Someone laughed while remembering a conversation with your daughter, not because it was humorous in the usual sense, but because it reminded them that genuine kindness still existed. Another person added their own story. Then another. Before long, everyone realized they were speaking about the same person from completely different experiences. None of them had planned it. The conversation simply found its own direction. That was when an older voice quietly broke the silence. "It is rare," they said softly, "to meet someone who leaves people feeling better than they found them." The room grew still. No one argued. No one searched for another example. Instead, everyone reflected on the moments they had almost forgotten. Small acts. Gentle words. Quiet encouragement. Suddenly, what had seemed ordinary became extraordinary simply because they viewed it together. Stay till the end, because another piece of the story is quietly falling into place. Across the room sat someone who had hardly spoken all evening. They had been listening carefully from the beginning, noticing the pattern hidden inside every story. Different places. Different people. Different days. Yet every conversation ended with the same feeling. A sense of hope that lingered long after your daughter had walked away. They found themselves wondering something they could no longer ignore. What gives someone the ability to leave kindness behind wherever they go? No one answered. The question remained in the air, inviting everyone to think beyond appearances. Perhaps they would never fully understand that the answer had been growing for years through countless ordinary moments. Through patient conversations after difficult days. Through lessons taught without speeches. Through quiet examples that were never intended to become unforgettable. Your daughter had become the kind of person who reflected the best parts of what she had received. Meanwhile, she remained completely unaware that her name had become part of conversations she would never hear. She wasn't trying to build a reputation. She wasn't seeking admiration. She simply continued choosing compassion, one ordinary moment at a time. And that, strangely enough, became the very reason people trusted her. Sometimes the greatest influence is never announced. It arrives quietly, settles gently, and changes people before they even realize something within them has shifted. As the evening came to a close, the same quiet observer stood to leave. Before walking away, they paused near the doorway and looked back one final time. "I think," they said with a thoughtful smile, "this story isn't really about your daughter alone." Everyone looked up. "I think it's about the people who helped shape her into who she is." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Those simple words carried more weight than anyone expected. The laughter that had filled the town suddenly gained a deeper meaning. It was no longer just appreciation for one young woman. It had become a quiet celebration of the unseen love, patience, and encouragement that had shaped her journey from the very beginning. Yet even now, another chapter is quietly approaching. Because someone who heard every one of those conversations has decided they would like to meet the family behind the stories. They have not introduced themselves. They have not explained their reason. But the choice has already been made. And when that meeting finally happens, everyone will discover that today's conversations were only the beginning of a much larger story waiting to unfold. Sometimes the most important chapter begins before anyone realizes a new chapter has even started. The town woke to another ordinary morning. Doors opened. Coffee brewed. Children hurried along familiar streets. Nothing looked different on the surface. Yet beneath those ordinary moments, quiet expectations had already begun to grow. Don't skip, because what seemed like another peaceful day was carrying a surprise that nobody could have predicted. Stay till the end. Because the meaning behind every conversation is only now becoming clear. The stories about your daughter continued to travel, but something had changed. People were no longer repeating them because they were interesting. They were repeating them because they made others pause and think about the kind of person they wanted to become. One neighbor spoke about the afternoon your daughter stayed behind to help someone finish a difficult task without ever mentioning it afterward. Another remembered how she welcomed someone sitting alone instead of joining the largest group in the room. Someone else smiled while recalling how she celebrated another person's success with genuine happiness, never trying to make the moment about herself. Each story was small. Each story seemed ordinary. Yet together they formed a picture that no single moment could have revealed. That was when an unexpected visitor arrived in town. No one recognized the face at first. There was nothing dramatic about their arrival. They simply walked through the streets with quiet curiosity, greeting people, asking gentle questions, and listening far more than they spoke. Before long, they noticed something unusual. No matter whom they met, the conversation eventually found its way back to the same name. Your daughter. The visitor smiled politely each time, expecting the stories to become exaggerated as conversations often do. Instead, the opposite happened. Every person described a different experience. Different places. Different days. Different situations. Yet every memory carried the same quiet thread of kindness. The visitor became fascinated. Can one person really leave this kind of impression? They wondered silently. That question stayed with them all day. As evening approached, they found themselves sitting on a quiet bench, reflecting on everything they had heard. They realized something remarkable. People were not remembering grand achievements. They were remembering moments that made them feel seen. A warm greeting. An encouraging word. A patient conversation. A thoughtful act that expected nothing in return. Those were the memories that refused to fade. Meanwhile, your daughter continued living her day exactly as she always had. She had no idea that someone had spent hours piecing together stories about her life. She wasn't trying to create a reputation. She wasn't hoping people would notice. She simply believed that every ordinary day was another opportunity to leave someone with a little more hope than before. That quiet decision had become her greatest strength. As the sun began to set, the visitor finally reached one conclusion. I've heard enough stories, they whispered. Now I'd like to meet the family who inspired them. At that very moment, a gentle breeze carried through the quiet streets, and the town settled into another peaceful evening, completely unaware that tomorrow would bring together people whose paths had been moving toward one another for much longer than anyone realized. The laughter that once filled the town was no longer simply laughter. It had become admiration. It had become gratitude. And before the next sunrise had fully arrived, the first step toward an unforgettable meeting had already been quietly set in motion. A single invitation can appear so ordinary that most people would overlook it without a second thought. Yet sometimes, hidden inside the simplest invitation is the beginning of a story that people remember for years. This was one of those moments. Don't skip, because what happened next did not arrive with loud announcements or dramatic surprises. It arrived quietly, almost gently, and that is exactly why it mattered so much. Stay till the end, because someone is about to understand the real reason the entire town has been smiling. The following afternoon, word began to spread that a small community gathering would take place before the weekend. Families were invited. Friends encouraged one another to come. There were no grand decorations, no elaborate plans, just people coming together to share time, conversation, and gratitude for the little things that often pass unnoticed. Your daughter accepted the invitation without expecting anything unusual. To her, it was simply another opportunity to spend time with familiar faces. She arrived with the same calm smile everyone had come to recognize, greeting each person as though they were the most important one in the room. She noticed someone standing alone near the entrance and walked over without hesitation, beginning a warm conversation that immediately eased their nervousness. A few people observed the moment quietly. They exchanged knowing smiles, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was exactly who she had always been. As the evening continued, laughter filled the room once again. Children played together. Friends shared stories. Neighbors remembered old memories that had almost been forgotten. Then someone stood and suggested a simple activity. Let's each share one person who has quietly made our year brighter. No one expected what happened next. For a brief moment, silence settled across the room. Then one voice spoke your daughter's name. Another voice followed. Then another. Soon the room was filled with different people sharing completely different experiences, yet every story carried the same message. Someone remembered how she encouraged them before an important opportunity. Another recalled how she stayed after everyone else had left just to make sure no one felt forgotten. Someone else smiled while describing a conversation that had changed the direction of an ordinary day. Your daughter looked around in complete surprise. She had forgotten many of those moments. She never imagined anyone else remembered them. The room wasn't celebrating perfection. It was celebrating consistency. The visitor who had been listening from the back of the gathering quietly watched every expression. They noticed something even more remarkable than the stories themselves. Every person speaking seemed happier while remembering her kindness. It was as though the memories continued giving joy long after the moments had passed. The visitor lowered their eyes for a moment and smiled. So this is why everyone has been talking, they thought. It was never about attention. It was about the feeling people carried home after meeting her. The evening slowly came to a close, but before everyone left, an older neighbor gently approached your daughter. You know, they said with a warm smile, people don't remember us only for the biggest moments. They remember how they felt when they were with us. You've given this town many reasons to smile. Those words stayed with her. Not because they brought pride, but because they reminded her that even the smallest acts of kindness can travel farther than we ever expect. As families began walking home beneath the quiet evening sky, the visitor remained behind for a few extra moments. They looked around the now peaceful gathering place and quietly made a decision. Tomorrow, they would finally introduce themselves. Not to ask about the stories. Not to confirm what they had already heard. But to thank the family whose everyday choices had quietly inspired an entire community. And as the lights faded and the streets grew still, no one yet realized that this simple meeting would uncover one final piece of the story, a piece that would explain why the town's laughter had always been filled with warmth, admiration, and hope from the very beginning.